Naomi Carter only wanted to surprise her husband on their wedding anniversary. She wore a simple blue dress, carried a box of pastries she had baked with her own hands, and walked into the glass tower where her husband served as chief executive officer of one of the largest technology companies in the country. She had rehearsed the moment in her mind the entire drive into the city, imagining the look on his face when he saw her standing in the lobby. But before she could even say his name to the man at the front desk, the head of security looked her up and down, then turned and pointed toward a beautifully dressed woman stepping out of the elevator. "That is the CEO's wife," he said, his voice carrying easily across the marble floor. A ripple of laughter moved through the lobby. Naomi stood perfectly still for a moment, her heart folding in on itself, and then she smiled, turned around, and walked back out into the rain. No one in that building had any idea that within a few short hours, the very man they worked for would make every single one of them answer for what had just happened. Naomi didn't know it yet, but her quiet exit was about to trigger a chain reaction that would destroy multiple corporate careers forever. For 10 years, Naomi Carter had lived a life that most people would never suspect belonged to the wife of a billionaire. She drove a modest gray sedan and shopped at the same local grocery store every Sunday. Her husband, Marcus Carter, was one of the most recognized entrepreneurs in America, a billionaire whose face covered business magazines. Yet, almost no one outside their closest circle knew her identity. It had not always been this way by accident. In the earliest days, inside a rented garage in Queens, Marcus and Naomi had built sterling tech together, side by side. Naomi had written the very first lines of code that became the backbone of the platform. But when the company exploded into fame, they made a quiet agreement. Marcus wanted the world to respect her as a brilliant engineer on her own terms, away from the toxic curiosity of media. To make the secrecy foolproof, Naomi had deliberately kept her name off the public founders page and moved her equity into a private, anonymous trust. Only the original 3 board members knew the truth. To the thousands of new employees hired over the decade, she simply did not exist. It was a perfect arrangement, until the silence left room for a dangerous lie to grow. As the years passed, the company brought in a new vice president of marketing, Vanessa Brooks. Sharp, polished, and managing Marcus's public image, Vanessa attended every gala and press conference alongside him. Photographers captured them together constantly, and soon, unchecked whispers spread through corporate circles. Everyone assumed Vanessa Brooks was the woman married to the famous CEO. Marcus, fiercely protective of his private life, maintained absolute silence about his marriage. And in that silence, Vanessa let the assumption calcify into accepted fact. On the morning of their anniversary, none of this was on Naomi's mind. She woke early, humming in her small kitchen, mixing batter for the pastries Marcus had loved since their very first year together. She drove into the city to close the distance between their separate worlds, parked 2 blocks away, and walked through the autumn drizzle, holding the pastry box against her chest, anticipating the joy on Marcus's face. Instead, she was met by a hypercritical receptionist and David Coleman, a heavy-set security guard who had worked there for 8 years. When Naomi gently explained she was Marcus Carter's wife, David scanned his tablet, saw no such name on the executive registry, and denied her entry. Right then, the elevator doors slid open. Vanessa Brooks stepped out in a tailored ivory coat. David, wanting to correct what he thought was an overeager intruder, pointed proudly at Vanessa and said loud enough for the lobby to hear, "That is the CEO's wife right there." An intern laughed. Someone murmured about mistaken identity. Naomi felt the warmth drain out of her chest. Holding her composure with absolute dignity, she simply nodded, turned around, and walked back into the heavy rain. Sitting in her car, her hands trembling against the steering wheel, Naomi didn't cry. Instead, her clinical engineer's mind took over. Why had a mistake this massive been allowed to take root? Over the following days, Naomi observed from a careful distance. She searched archived coverage with the same patience she once brought to broken code. Vanessa appeared beside Marcus in countless photographs, even being referred to in captions as the First Lady of Sterling Tech. In a 3-year-old interview, when asked directly about her relationship with the founder, Vanessa had given a vague answer about closeness and shared vision, never confirming the rumor, but never once denying it. Vanessa had cultivated the lie deliberately, trading on an assumed marriage for professional ambition. During this time, Marcus called her constantly, his voice warm but distracted by corporate events. Naomi let every call go to voicemail. She listened to each message only after the phone stopped ringing, but every time she reached for the callback button, the burning memory of the lobby pulled her hand away. She needed space to breathe before she could face him. The missing piece of the puzzle arrived when Naomi quietly returned to the building a few days later to observe. David Coleman, feeling awkward about the misunderstanding, approached her to apologize. Relieved by her grace, he let slip that the upcoming gala was centered around an enormous announcement regarding a very important woman connected to the company's history. Naomi's heart hammered. A major announcement. A special woman. Vanessa constantly by his side. It was not difficult to imagine the worst. She began to believe that Marcus intended to finally make his relationship with Vanessa public, erasing Naomi from his life entirely to protect his corporate image. The night of the gala arrived. Standing near the back of the glittering grand ballroom, hidden from the executive tables, Naomi watched the room. When Vanessa Brooks appeared on stage in a deep emerald gown, the host introduced her as the woman who had stood beside the chief executive through every major milestone. Vanessa smiled, accepting the title without a flicker of hesitation. She truly believed this night belonged to her. Even the seating charts placed Vanessa at the table nearest the podium. Naomi braced herself for impact. Marcus stepped onto the stage, and the ballroom fell into an immediate, expectant hush. He thanked the crowd, acknowledged the years of speculation, and paused. He looked toward Vanessa's table. Vanessa offered a confident, radiant smile. The crowd leaned in, cameras raised. Marcus locked eyes with Vanessa for a long, silent 3 seconds. The room held its breath. Then, his gaze swept past her, looking toward the back of the room. "Tonight," Marcus said, his voice steady but thick with hidden emotion, "I want to finally answer a question honestly. Because I have let a mistake go uncorrected for far too long, and it has cost someone I love more than she should ever have had to pay." Behind him, the massive screen flickered to life. The image wasn't of Vanessa. It was a grainy, decade-old photograph of a cramped garage, showing a young woman in a messy bun hunched over a second-hand computer, coding under a single fluorescent bulb. Naomi's breath caught. It was her. "This is the person who wrote the very first version of the software that built this empire," Marcus announced, his voice echoing with absolute pride. "This is my wife. Her name is Naomi Carter, and she is the true co-founder of everything you see around you tonight." A stunned, absolute silence swept through the ballroom. Glasses stopped clinking. Somewhere near the front, Vanessa Brooks froze, her polished composure shattering visibly across her face as she realized, in front of the entire industry, that she was not the woman Marcus was honoring. Tears finally broke free as Naomi stood near the back wall. Breaking protocol, Marcus stepped down from the stage, moving through the parting crowd with single-minded urgency until he reached her. He didn't speak. He simply took her hand gently, just like their first date 15 years ago, and led her out of the shadows and into the light, while the entire ballroom rose to its feet in a thunderous wave of applause. The fallout was swift. The next morning, Vanessa Brooks was called into a private meeting with Marcus and the board. When asked if she ever considered the real woman behind the rumors, Vanessa quietly admitted she had never allowed herself to think of Naomi as real at all. Within the hour, Vanessa was stripped of her title, her access revoked, and she left the building through a side door. Marcus immediately called a meeting of all department heads. Standing at the long table, he made it clear that the humiliation of his wife in their lobby was a failure of corporate culture. The receptionist was dismissed, and David Coleman faced formal disciplinary action. Marcus announced a strict, immediate policy: every visitor, regardless of appearance, would be treated with equal dignity. "The woman who built our foundation," Marcus warned, "once looked like nobody important to this room." Turning to Naomi, Marcus offered a raw, public apology for the silence that had allowed her to be erased. Naomi, speaking with absolute dignity, stated she wanted no further firings out of revenge. She simply wanted a culture where a rain-soaked dress and a box of pastries received the same respect as a designer coat. By the time autumn deepened, the hierarchy of the front desk had been architecturally flattened, becoming a symbol of the company's new reality. Naomi didn't seek the spotlight or a board seat, choosing instead to occasionally drop by the 14th floor, sitting with the younger engineers to talk code and putting them at ease by insisting they call her Naomi. On the evening it all finally settled, Marcus and Naomi left the glass tower together as a gentle mist fell across the city streets. They walked hand in hand, their silence filled with the easy trust that had carried them through a rented garage into a billionaire's empire. Behind them, the lights of Sterling Tech glowed against the dark sky, a monument built on her mind and their shared belief. They didn't look back. They understood completely that a marriage worth keeping was never built on the applause of the world, but on the unshakable decision to stand beside each other, especially when the rest of the world failed to see the truth standing right in front of them. Later that night, back home away from the corporate noise, Marcus sat at the kitchen table and opened the slightly crushed box of pastries Naomi had carried through the rain. He took a single bite, smiled through his tears, and whispered, "Happy anniversary, my secret weapon."